The glass tower of Hawthorne Industries gleamed against the city skyline, a monument of power and money. Inside, the air was thick with tension. A team of engineers huddled around a giant blueprint sprawled across the conference table, their brows damp with sweat. At the head of the room sat Victor Hawthorne, Billionaire CEO, his suit sharp as steel, his tone sharper. He leaned back in his leather chair, smirking at the panic that unfolded before him. 3 months, he said coldly. 3 months of your brightest minds and still nothing. His voice cut through the silence. Then, with cruel amusement, he tossed a tablet across the polished table. The numbers on the screen glowed red. Fix this, and I'll hand you $100 million.
Fail, and you're finished. No one spoke.
The stakes were too high. The company's future hung by a thread, and Victor knew it. He thrived on their fear. By the door, unnoticed by most, stood a woman in a faded uniform, clutching her cleaning cart. Maria the maid kept her head bowed, trying not to draw attention. But her eyes lingered on the tablet, on the code that stumped the world's top engineers. She swallowed hard. She had seen those symbols before. From behind her, a quiet voice whispered, "Mama."
I know what that is. It was her son, Daniel, barely 16, wiry from years of growing up without luxuries, but with a sharpness in his gaze that rivaled any scholar.
He had come to walk her home, but now his eyes locked onto the glowing lines of code as if it were a puzzle made just for him. Victor's laughter echoed across the room. "What's the matter?"
100 million too much pressure for you?
No one answered. But Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady despite the disbelief hanging in the air. "I can fix it." Heads whipped around. Engineers sneered. Victor froze, his smirk faltering for the first time. The room, once ruled by arrogance and silence, now belonged to a boy who had nothing to his name but a mind no one had seen coming. And in that moment, the game changed. Victor Hawthorne's brows drew together, his eyes narrowing on the boy who had dared to interrupt. "You," he said slowly, his voice thick with disbelief. "You think a janitor's kid can fix what my best-paid men cannot?" The engineers chuckled under their breath, some shaking their heads, others smirking. Daniel stood firm, unflinching under the weight of their scorn. His mother tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Daniel, no, please." But the boy gently pulled free, his eyes locked on the glowing numbers that had reduced grown men to silence. "Give me one chance," Daniel said evenly. "If I'm wrong, I'll walk away, and you'll never hear from me again." Victor rose from his chair, the steel buckle of his belt catching the light as he leaned over the table. His voice dropped low, the smirk returning. "One chance?"
Do you even know what those figures mean, boy?
Daniel stepped closer, the polished floor reflecting his thin frame. "It's not just code," he said, surprising everyone. "It's layered, deliberately scrambled to make you chase the wrong patterns. Whoever wrote it was hiding something."
That's why your men keep failing. The room went still.
One of the engineers, a greying man with trembling fingers, looked at Daniel with dawning horror, as if he had just realized the boy was right. Victor studied him for a long, dangerous moment. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he shoved the tablet toward Daniel.
Fine, he said, his voice laced with mockery.
"Show me, genius." "The room is yours." Daniel sat, the oversized leather chair nearly swallowing him. His fingers flew over the glass screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. Symbols, lines, and formulas danced under his touch. The engineers watched, a mixture of disdain and creeping awe tugging at their faces. Maria wrung her hands near the door, her heart hammering. She whispered a prayer under her breath, tears stinging her eyes. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Silence gripped the room like a vice, broken only by the rapid tapping of Daniel's hands. And then, beep. The red warnings vanished. The impossible code unraveled before their eyes, clean and flawless, exposing the answer none of the experts had even glimpsed. Victor Hawthorne leaned forward, stunned. His lips parted as he stared at the boy. The laughter was gone, the arrogance too. Daniel looked up, calm and steady. "There," he said simply.
"It's done." The room erupted, gasps, mutters, the scrape of chairs.
But Victor didn't move. For the first time in years, the billionaire CEO was silent, undone not by an empire or a rival, but by a maid's son. Victor's silence stretched long enough to make every man in the room uneasy. His fingers drummed once on the mahogany table, sharp as a gunshot. Then he stood, slow and deliberate, his gaze fixed on Daniel like he was studying a rare, dangerous creature. "You just did what my best men couldn't in 3 months," Victor said, his voice low and measured.
A janitor's boy, cracking the code that crippled an empire. Daniel swallowed hard, but held his ground.
"You said 100 million.
"That was your promise!" The engineers erupted in protest. "This is absurd!"
He's a child, he must have cheated."
"There's no way he—" Victor silenced them with a raised hand.
His eyes never left Daniel.
"Do you know what you've touched, boy?"
That code wasn't just numbers, it was the key to everything I own. Daniel met his gaze. "Then you should be glad I fixed it," Maria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She wanted to pull her son away, shield him from the fire in Victor's eyes. But Daniel sat steady, as if he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. Finally, Victor let out a laugh, short, sharp, and unsettling. He turned to his men.
"Get out, all of you!" The engineers exchanged nervous glances, but none dared argue.
One by one, they filed out until only Victor, Maria, and Daniel remained in the vast, echoing room. Victor stepped closer, his shadow falling across the boy. He crouched low, their faces level now, and spoke in a tone that carried both menace and respect.
"You've just changed your life forever, Daniel.
The question is, will you live to enjoy it?" Maria's breath caught, and Daniel's knuckles tightened around the edge of the tablet. The billionaire CEO had made his move, but whether it meant reward or ruin was still hanging in the balance. Victor rose to his full height, towering over both mother and son. He walked back to his chair with the deliberate steps of a man who knew every heartbeat in the room belonged to him. When he sat down, he poured himself a drink, the ice clinking loud in the silence. Then finally, he spoke. "The 100 million, he paused, savoring the weight of the words.
"Is yours." Maria staggered back, her hand clutching the edge of the chair.
Daniel blinked in disbelief, his breath catching as though the air had been stolen from the room. Victor leaned forward, his sharp eyes narrowing. "But don't mistake this for charity. I'm not a man who throws money at fools. You've proven yourself, boy. You've proven that brilliance can come from dirt."
"And brilliance like that?"
He lifted his glass.
"I buy. I own." Maria stepped forward, her voice trembling.
"He's not for sale."
"He's just a boy." Victor smirked.
"That may be true. But in my world, talent is more valuable than bloodlines, than degrees, than power. Your son just walked into my empire and exposed every weakness I didn't know I had. He belongs at my side." Daniel spoke quietly, but his words cut clean through the tension.
"I don't belong to anyone." Victor's glass froze halfway to his lips.
He studied Daniel with a new kind of interest, not anger, but something sharper, hungrier. "You remind me of myself," he murmured. Then his smile returned, cold and razor-thin. "But even the strongest minds need protection.
"And in this city, without me, you and your mother wouldn't last a day."
So the choice is simple. Accept my offer or learn what it means to refuse me." Maria's heart pounded. Daniel sat straighter, refusing to flinch. The boy who had grown up fixing broken things with nothing but scraps was now staring down the most dangerous man in the city. And in that silence, Maria realized the test wasn't over. It had only just begun.
Years passed and the kind table grew into something far greater than Lily or Andrew Whitman could have imagined. There were now branches in nearly every state, and even in small towns where hope had once been scarce. Each restaurant looked a little Different, but every one of them carried the same warmth, the same smell of coffee and baked bread, and the same simple promise carved in wood above every door, where hearts are fed before plates. Lily's story had turned into a legend told by parents, to their children, by teachers, to their students, and by strangers to one another on quiet nights over steaming cups of tea. They called her the woman who served the world because her kindness had rippled far beyond what she ever saw. Faith Whitman, Andrew's granddaughter, became the head of the Kind Table Foundation. She was a woman of quiet strength, much like Lily, humble, steady, and fiercely devoted to the cause. Each morning she visited one of the restaurants unannounced, sitting among the customers just to feel what Lily once felt. People still spoke of Lily as if she had just stepped out for a break. Her spirit lived in the laughter that filled those walls, in the generosity that moved from one person to another, like an endless current. One day, Faith received a letter from a small-town diner on the edge of the country. The manager wrote that a mysterious old woman had been coming in every morning, ordering nothing but coffee and always paying double. Faith smiled at the story and decided to visit the place herself. When she arrived, she found the woman sitting by the window, grey-haired, frail, but with eyes that carried the same spark she had seen in the photographs of Lily. The woman looked up and smiled. "You must be from the foundation." Faith nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" The woman's voice was soft. "Because you look like him." Andrew. Faith froze. "You knew my grandfather?" The woman nodded. "I worked in his company before the accident. I saw what losing everything did to him, and I saw how meeting Lily brought him back to life. He used to tell me that her kindness rebuilt his soul." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. "Do you know why he kept coming back to that restaurant?" Faith shook her head. The woman smiled. "Because it was the only place in the world where he wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man being treated with respect." Those words stayed with Faith. She returned to the foundation with a new mission, expanding its reach beyond food, to build community centers, hospitals and schools, all bearing the same name, the Kind Table. Each one served the same purpose: to treat every person, rich or poor, famous or forgotten, with the same dignity Lily once gave to a stranger with a cane decades. Later, the foundation celebrated its 100th anniversary. Faith stood on stage before thousands of people, holding the same wooden key Lily once used to open her diner. She said softly, "This key once unlocked a door to a small restaurant. But what it really opened was humanity's heart." The crowd stood in silence as she placed the key into a glass frame on display beside Lily's apron and Andrew's cane. Outside one of the diners, a small boy and his mother walked in from the rain. The boy pointed to the sign and asked Mom, "What does it mean, where hearts are fed before plates?" She smiled, kneeling beside him. "It means that kindness comes before everything else." The boy thought for a moment, then grinned wide. "I want to work here when I grow up." And somewhere in that diner, among the scent of coffee and the hum of conversation, it felt as though Lily was still there, smiling from that corner booth, the woman whose kindness had crossed a century without fading. Years later, the Kind Table Foundation had grown into one of the most beloved humanitarian networks in the world. There were now hundreds of branches across countries, each one serving food to the hungry, teaching job skills to the poor, and offering shelter to those who had nowhere else to go. The name Lily had become a symbol of quiet heroism, the proof that compassion could build empires stronger than money ever could. In every new city, the first cup of coffee was always poured for her and placed at a small table by the window, the same way she used to serve others. In that empty chair, people found comfort, a reminder that goodness never truly leaves it, simply changes form. One summer morning at the original restaurant, now preserved as a historical site, a group of students arrived carrying notebooks and cameras. They were writing a report on the world's most influential social movements, and Faith Whitman, now old but radiant, welcomed them with a smile. She led them through the place that started it all, pointing to photographs on the walls showing Lily, Andrew, and the first customers. When one of the students asked, "Why did a billionaire pretend to be poor?" Faith laughed softly. He wasn't pretending, he was testing the world, and the world failed until Lily passed the test. She never saw wealth or power. She only saw hunger and answered it with kindness. As the group left, Faith sat alone for a moment at the same table by the window. She placed her cane beside her and whispered, quietly, "They still come, Andrew. They still care." She smiled at the thought of Lily, the woman who had built an empire out of love. That evening, Faith attended the grand opening of a new, kind table in another country. Thousands gathered to celebrate, and a young volunteer stepped forward to read a letter written decades earlier by Lily herself. It said, "Kindness is the only meal that never runs out. The more you serve it, the fuller your own heart becomes." The crowd fell silent, then erupted in applause, not for fame, not for money, but for the power of one waitress who had changed the course of countless lives. As the lights dimmed and the ribbon was cut, the first customer of the night, a little girl clutching her mother's hand, walked. Through the door, the waiter poured a cup of coffee and placed it on the table by the window, whispering softly, "Welcome home, Lily." The legend of the kind table lived on, not as a restaurant chain, but as a movement. Each cup of coffee, each shared meal, each kind word carried a piece of Lily's spirit, reminding everyone that greatness begins in the smallest act of love and that every simple gesture can echo across generations. If this story made you smile, share it with someone who needs a reminder that accidents can turn into beautiful beginnings.